Welcome to the Strong for Life podcast. I'm your host, Conor O'Shea, and I really appreciate you tuning in. If you are enjoying these episodes, I'd really appreciate you taking a moment and rating it 5 stars on Spotify or on Apple or whatever podcast platform you use. This is going to allow more people to find this information. Without further ado, let's jump into today's show. All right, folks. So super excited to share today's guest. Super interesting story and what she's involved in, what she's trying to do. It's Jess Angland, who is CEO of Sli Eile, which is a super interesting project in Cork, in the south of Ireland, for people who mightn't be from Ireland listening. And I think, Jess, I'm just going to get you to explain about what you guys do in detail, because you're going to explain it much better than I ever will. So maybe let's just jump into, a bit about yourself quickly for the people listening, and then all things about Sli Eile, okay?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm the Chief Operations Officer of Sli Eile, which is the Irish for another way. And the project was set up quite a number of years ago by a woman, Joan Hamilton, whose daughter had her own, I suppose, mental health challenges. And, why she called it Sli Eile was because I suppose she could see her going in and out of hospital and, not really improving, but maybe the medication going up. And she just wanted to try something different. So at that time, she just got some funding for a house in Charleville, and that's where they started, which is a small town in North Cork. But now at this stage, we are here in Burton Park, which is 150 acres. We've got 50. We have an organic farm. We've got a bakery. We've got a transitional house in Charleville. And I suppose we have an organic farmers market every Saturday. We'll have it tomorrow. So the project has really grown, and we also got funding from the HSE here, which provides about 90% of our funding. So we're the only one in the country so far. So we're for people who have severe mental health challenges, who need somewhere to come and recover, and to get their life back on track. So I like to think it's kind of like a safe base initially. So it's safe, it's 24-hour residential, and it also offers somebody an opportunity to kind of get their life back into some kind of routine. So like people might have been in their room for a very long time. They might have been socially excluded. They mightn't have been in work. They might have been in hospital for a very long time in a psychiatric unit. And so when they come here, I suppose what's different, I think, about it is it's a community of people. So we've got volunteers who come in, the staff. It's hard to describe the energy of the place, I think. It's about accepting people for where they're at. And obviously we do get a report on their diagnosis, but we're more interested in the person. So if somebody comes and they say, well, I'm hearing voices, our response to that would be, okay, yeah, that's great. What are the voices telling you? We're a trauma-informed service. I have a big interest in trauma myself. And so we have an understanding that sometimes a lot of these things come from previous traumas that somebody has experienced. We offer residential care, we offer care planning, we have a counsellor who comes in here once a week. Like I remember saying to you, I was very surprised that a lot of the people here who had been through mental health hadn't really had any long-term counselling. So when I started here about 2.5 years ago, we brought in a counsellor, and we pay most of the counselling, and the tenant, if you like, pays 10 euros, which isn't very much. So the idea is somebody will come here, we accept them as they are, and we try and get them back on their feet, really, because I think what happens to somebody is that they lose a lot of confidence in themselves. They've been out of work, they've got the stigma of mental health to deal with. They may have lost kind of contact with their family, or their family mightn't be able to cope with what's been happening. Like I had a lady in here the other day, a really lovely woman, and she was saying, everybody in her local village knows that she's got schizophrenia, and she feels very ashamed because she's got schizophrenia. And I think, my message would be, that mental health is everybody's business, and we all have mental health. We all have days when we're not great, and maybe we're all along that continuum. So I suppose acceptance would be a big part of our value, what I hope is our value here, acceptance. And I was saying to you that a lot of the staff here, I think what we all bring is care and concern and heart, which can sometimes be missing, So I think it's a safe place, and it does give somebody an opportunity to recover, to be accepted as they are. And there's a lot of grief, like a lot of grief for the people who come here as well, because they may have had one life, and now maybe because of their mental illness, they may not be able to lead that life anymore. And I would talk a lot to them about, okay, that was one life, but you may have a different life now, and you may go on to do things you'll never have done because you had this experience. But that's down the line,
Yeah.
So, that's down the line. And then, so somebody will come here, it's 24-hour care. And then as time moves on, they might go to the cottage, which are on the grounds here, and there are no staff in the cottage. And then we're talking about moving into Charleville, which is a transitional house. There's only staff there in the morning and the bakery. And so, they're partaking in the farm or the bakery. And as time goes on, then we're looking at, what would you like to do? We might refer them for career counselling to an adult career counsellor, or we might look at, would you like to do a course? How can we support you to do that course? We'd be still supporting them in terms of, say, going to their doctor or going to the psychiatrist. So what that looks like is we'll drive somebody there, we'll be with them, because it can be quite anxious going to a psychiatrist. We might go into the psychiatrist with them to advocate on their behalf.
That's huge.
It's very big, actually. Even that in itself is big.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then on the way home, because then often somebody can be very tired. It's been a lot to go to the psychiatrist. So maybe on the way home, we'll have a chat about how is it going, any worries or concerns, or it might be that in the time they're here, they might go home. So we might be kind of preparing them for home. What's it going to be like when you're at home? When they come back, what happened? What could have gone better? What would you like to have happened? What might you do the next time around? Maybe when somebody goes home, it's too emotional, so they might decide not to go home. So it's very much, I think, Conor, it's about what does the person need. It's not necessarily what we think they might need. Obviously, we have ideas, but it's what do they need at that particular time. And we're the only one in the country. There is one to open in Kildare in 2024, but we are the only one currently in the country. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love, because we talked a few weeks ago, the reason I reached out to you is because my mother's got schizophrenia. I wanted to see more about what you guys are doing, and just the stuff you're doing is very much linked to recovery versus being stuck in a system for decades. And it's like you're just on this hamster wheel of getting unwell, getting hospitalized, overly medicated, sent home, and then that process just repeats itself, which is that's actually madness, I think, versus the actual condition. But I'd like to go into more detail around a lot of the specifics you talked about, but I'd like to go into your background a bit much more first. So what brought you on this journey to become want to get involved with this organization?
So I have a very unusual background, Conor. So initially I started my career 30 years ago at this point in marketing. So I did a degree in business, believe it or not, and worked in marketing in British Telecom in London. And then I always had a bit of a thing about the underdog, I suppose, because I was a bit of a one myself in some ways. And when I came back to Ireland in the 90s, I went off and did a master's in business. But what really interested me when I was doing it was the psychology side of it, why people behave the way they behave. That really interested me. And then I suppose I had to make a choice at that point. So I also worked with people who dropped out of college or school when I was in third level. And then I really became interested in young people, for example, as I worked in youth reach for a while, but young people who drop out of the school system. And I suppose when I was there, it was a lot about addiction and trauma. And, because these things happened, they didn't fit in a system. And then I worked in community development for a while. So I could see how maybe the main systems don't always help somebody who's had a difficult background. And then I worked in domestic violence. I don't know if I said that to you, for about 13 years in Limerick. Yeah, so I worked about 13 years in Limerick. I guess why I was drawn to that is there was domestic violence in my own family, in my extended family, and that I was always interested as to why was that happening? Why had it happened? What responses were there? And of course, there aren't too many really as such, although it has improved, and there was stigma attached to that as well. And then the job came up here around mental health, and I'd worked a lot with women in domestic violence who had experienced mental health issues as well. And I keep going back to the trauma piece, because the trauma seemed to be the thing that was in all of it. You know, it was with the kids who dropped out of school, was with the domestic violence, with the mental health, with addiction. And then this project, I wasn't actually looking for a job because I was working for myself, but I was really interested in, you can't heal trauma unless you have a safe space. You know, you have to be in a safe space. And that, I think when I came here, that's what I was really interested in, about creating a safe place for people. And I was really interested in acceptance. You accept the person as they are. And also I think about just an understanding of that the staff would have an understanding of trauma-informed care, because I was interested in myself. I'd done a good bit of training in it, and just that we all have trauma, every single one of us, and that leaves a legacy. And then for some people, that legacy is greater than for others. But I think it's much more, I don't know, there's an acceptance, and, you know, that this is why the person is, this is the legacy they've got. It's not what they have done, it's what happened to them. So I think, yeah, thinking back through all of it, I think that's what drew me to here. And I suppose what keeps me here, because some days it can be hard, it can be hard work, you know. I think what keeps me here is when we see people go on to have a life, you know, who've gone through here. You know, we've had people who've gone on and they're now working, they're living a good life. We've other people who aren't working, but they're living a good life. They're not revolving in and out through the psychiatric unit. And I think there's just something about community. Like, we have a really big community here in Sli Eile, between the community in Churchtown, the volunteers who come in, the staff who come in. I don't know, there's just something really lovely about being accepted as you are. And I said to you about the market, which is on a Saturday, and it's really hard to tell, like, who's the staff member and who's the tenant, you know, which I think is really good. Because there's a thin line for any of us, really.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I think that's what brought me here, what kept me here. And I really believe that places like this, like, we have work to do, you know, there's not saying we have it all covered, because we don't have it all covered. But I think there is certainly room within the mental health arena for places like this, where you're not in a hospital. You know, the work piece is an important piece, actually, that you're needed, that you're wanted, that you get your life back into some kind of structure and routine, and understanding and acceptance, you know, that just because I have a mental, that I'm no lesser than anybody else.
That's such an important point. Like, because I think, like, even if nothing was wrong with someone, but you're told this is what you are now, and you're blacklisted basically in society, like, that's going to have a massive impact on your psyche, even if everything's completely fine in your life, you know.
Which is why, when obviously we get people's mental health report from the mental health professionals around their diagnosis, you know. But I couldn't tell you what the diagnosis of the people here is. I mean, I'm sure I read the report when it comes and I put it into the filing cabinet. But after that, I don't know. You know, I've forgotten it in some ways, because it's not important to me. It's more important about, how is this person today? You know, what is it they need today from us? Do we have an understanding of what they need? How can we help them? You know, because sometimes the steps can be small. You know, for somebody, like we had this morning, somebody went to social welfare to get their social welfare sorted out, and a worker went with them. And he was very upset after. So, you know, meeting social welfare, it's just because it's such a hard thing anyway for any of us to do, you know, but it's the fact of today, that was a big thing for him to do. But he had somebody with him, he had support. And because the worker was in here talking to me, and she was saying, well, look, I told him I'd been in social welfare years ago, and it can be difficult. So it's to normalise. Yes, it was difficult, but actually it's okay, because we all have difficult things, you know.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
Or it's not because you've got bipolar, it's because it's difficult anyway. I don't know if I'm getting the truth to you. It's just, I don't know, there's a bit about me just accepting people as they are and not stigmatizing them. I have a really big thing about that, actually. Probably I'm only realizing it as I'm talking to you, that's a big thing for me, probably, is just not being stigmatized and accepting people as they are.
Yeah, I could see just that having such a massive impact on someone's confidence and recovery as well. what I'd like to actually go into in more detail is any specific patterns. So you're seeing this, like, everyone has trauma to certain degrees, but you're seeing very clearly with all your work that all of these people who have developed, like, we'll say, more serious psychiatric conditions,
Yeah.
that's pretty much always there's some sort of trauma history, would you say,
There's
like
some,
pretty much
yeah, I
all the
think
time
there's
or a lot of the time?
I think there's a very high percentage of trauma. I
Mm.
think some people, it can be that drug-induced psychosis, that they may have dabbled in something and then it brought on the psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
A very high percentage of the people we work with here would have had experiences of traumatic experiences. So it could be maybe domestic violence growing up, it could be sexual abuse, it could be bullying and harassment, it could be physical attacks, it could be suicide. There's a thing with trauma informed care which is called the ACEs. And if you 4 or more ACEs, you're likely to experience significant health concerns. Now, we don't screen people for that here, but just anecdotally, quite a lot of the people who come here would have had experiences like that.
Do you want to explain what they are for people listening, just off the
Yeah,
top of your head?
so with the ACEs, off the top of my head, would be things like if you experience things like sexual abuse, domestic violence, incarceration of a parent, mental health of a parent growing up, divorce, separation. I think there's about 9 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you are likely to experience significant health concerns. Doesn't mean you will, but you're likely.
Yeah. So you're higher risk, we'll say, because of these instances that have occurred.
Yeah, exactly.
And
you're at risk. Yeah.
and that can be physical ailments or
Yeah, it can
mental
be physical or mental
conditions.
or addiction. So like, for example, if you look at the whole root of addiction, why they think people become addicted is because it's a trauma response.
Gotcha. So they're
Yeah.
using a substance to pacify the pain that's
Yeah.
caused from that previous
Yeah,
issue.
exactly. That's a deep rooted pain that you mightn't necessarily be aware of, but that's the trauma legacy pieces, it's still there. So like what would be common trauma legacy pieces that we would see here is that when people come initially, they may not trust you. We expect that.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if they've had traumatic experiences in relationships, we expect that they won't trust us. We expect that they're going to be self-reliant. We expect that they're not going to ask us for help. So they're kind of things, being trauma informed, we know those, we expect they won't have great boundaries maybe. So they're all the things we kind of are expecting. And what I would talk about when they come here is breaking that pattern of self-reliance. And like only recently last week, I was talking to somebody, who was quite upset, and I was saying, the thing we're going to be working on a lot with when you're here is looking for help from us.
Yeah. So how do you go about that for someone? Because I guess if your entire life experience is people letting you down, screwing you over, doing terrible things, and then, so how do you start? Like, what I'm always curious about, like, initial steps to change behaviors and habits. So how do you approach that with people at Sli Eile?
Like, again, it's a bit depends on the person, and it
Mm-hmm.
depends on how much trauma, how much complex trauma they've actually had. Usually you get like an opening. So it's like a small thing that might happen. So I suppose, look, it could be like, I'm thinking about last week with somebody who came quite upset, and he went off to his room and he hid in his room rather than coming to us for help. So like I was talking to him and I was saying, look, one of the things we are going to look at here is looking for help. And we know that's probably something that you haven't done a lot of in the past. And generally speaking, I suppose people won't say much, but they'll nod at you, or it could be, sometimes it's just being aware of it. Like we had somebody this week who made a big step. He's got agoraphobia, and he made a big step really of going out to the hospital. And what I was talking to him about was, we're all here. We're actually here with you. Now, until that happened, I think it just was a big step for him, So it's all of those things. I can't tell you exactly because it's not an exact science, but it's usually where, because I know about trauma and because I know there's a trauma legacy, I'm expecting it. So sometimes I'll just talk to somebody about, sometimes when we experience trauma, we've got this stuff left over. Very simply, look, we've all got trauma, but we might have bits left over from it.
Yeah. And just as you're saying that, like, it's a pretty complex issue from a mental and physical health point of view, because like if a lot of your family history is mental health,
Yeah.
everyone's passing it on, and
Yeah.
then you're higher risk already because you're growing up in that environment. So how do you see like that cycle being broken? Is it like on the individual? Is it on the state? Like how, or is it more of just a kind of global educational standpoint to so people are more aware?
Yeah, I think there is a thing called intergenerational trauma, that we carry traumatic stuff now in our bodies. And there's a lot of people out there writing about it, like Gabriel Maté writes a lot about it. Undercog writes a lot about it. There's probably a lot of services are becoming trauma informed.
What was the second person's name after Gabriel Maté?
Vanderkolk. So he's
Oh,
written,
Vanderkolk, yeah.
he's got the trauma, the body holds the score. So there's a lot of stuff out there now, literature. There's a lot of organizations becoming trauma informed. Like Dr. Sharon Lambert in UCC, I know her, she's really good. She does a lot on trauma informed care. So there was the first conference in Ireland, it was a few years ago actually, and it was all about trauma informed care. I was at it myself. So it's looking at, I think it's kind of a gathering momentum a bit, to understand that we all carry it. We can actually carry somebody else's trauma, and then maybe looking at what's left over for us. So the bits we know here, obviously not looking after myself, self-care might be an issue, not trusting, the self-reliance, relationships might be an issue, because the reality is I probably want to get there first. I'll probably try for abandonment. I'll be thinking about abandonment, even though I'm not really thinking about it, if you know what I mean. So I'll want to get there first.
What do you mean by that example of abandonment?
What we see here, for example, is sometimes people can test you. Like, is she really as good as she says she is? Can I really trust her? So let's push the boundary a small bit. And actually, this is all unconscious now, Is she's really, can I really trust her? So let's push her. Will she still be there, even if I push the boundary? Or sometimes maybe that they might reject us because actually it's safer. Because I know, like, for example, in this, you have a thing like either surviving or thriving. So I know survival, so I can survive by myself because that's what I've learned to do. That's been my coping mechanism. To thrive, I'm probably going to have to trust somebody else. I'm going to have to develop a relationship. But that is a source of fear for me if I've experienced a lot of trauma.
Yeah. Okay. And that's really the path to totally. So it's getting that person to trust and then to move in. And I guess if people are coming to you, like who might have been in the public mental health system for a decade or more, so they're going to be very low trust with that kind of experience, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah. So I mean, to be fair to the people in the mental health system, they're so overstretched themselves, I think.
Yeah.
I think just it's difficult for them too. They're so overstretched and under-resourced as well. So I think when somebody gets here, they want to come here. So they have they're opting to come here. And we do a thing where for 2 weeks they come and they see if they like it. If they don't like it, that's fine. But even in that, sometimes what happens is the whole thing about being trapped. You can see it, that they're afraid they're going to be trapped here and that we're going to keep them here, because that has been maybe their experience, particularly if they have been involuntarily admitted to a psychiatric unit.
Yeah.
So afraid of being trapped, afraid of the doors being locked, because that might have been their experience, you see.
Let's shift gears into the psychoeducation side of things. I found this really helpful when we talked about this a few weeks ago, and it's something that I think should be just standard practice for families. Yeah. We didn't know anything about schizophrenia in our family, and we weren't really educated on it. So I'd love you to kind of explain to people, in particular for people who maybe have a family member with schizophrenia, with bipolar, with something like this, how you actually go about not just educating the person in the situation, but also like the family dynamics. Maybe they're triggering each other when they come back into contact, and just education around that, which I think is super interesting. And
they are
important.
Often. So I suppose when somebody comes here, we will work with the family as well, because there's not much point in somebody coming here for 18 months and developing themselves if they go back into the family system and that hasn't come with them, if you know what I mean. So sometimes, like, family members may may not quite understand that this person has schizophrenia or bipolar. And like, I'll give you an example. They might be quite high flyers in their career, but they may not want to be doing that anymore because of their mental health and because maybe they don't want to do it anymore. So sometimes there can be a pressure from the family to go back into that life that they once had, not understanding that actually maybe the person isn't able to do it, doesn't want to do it. And I think it's also, I suppose, even we sit down with the family and say, look, this person is going back at home. Part of it might be impulsivity. So, for example, that they might be quite impulsive, but that's part of their condition, as opposed to the family might be saying, oh my God, here he is again doing the stuff that we've already told him not to do. But from our perspective, it might be saying, look, this is part of the condition, the impulsivity piece, to understand that this is the impulsivity piece, Now we were hoping, which we haven't got to do a RAP program for family members. And RAP, we've done it with the tenants here as a wellness recovery action program, and it's kind of an understanding of mental health, and also for the tenant to understand, well, if I'm not feeling well, how do I know if I'm not feeling well? What are the indicators? Who's the person I go to when I'm not feeling great? And what am I going to allow them to do with me or to say to me? But with the parents, it's very important to work with the family members. Really important, yeah.
Yeah, and like for people, can you maybe give some maybe signs, or let's just say you found out your sibling, parent, child has schizophrenia, we'll say, what would be some common maybe behaviors that you could say, okay, maybe I need to, put more attention on this?
Yeah, it could be in a variety of things. Like it can be, for example, the voice hearing. They may not tell you about that, but they may be voice hearing. There may be obviously hallucinations. I suppose there can sometimes be extremes. It's like extremes of behavior. Like sometimes they can be very high and then sometimes very low. Stories, I'm just off the top of my head now, sometimes you can hear things and I'm kind of going, okay, that must be the condition, because it's kind of like stuff that's not really possible. That losing touch with reality piece, the reality of now, but it is their reality, but for the rest of it, it isn't our reality. Manic, that kind of manicness. So, I've dealt with somebody here who probably was up 24 hours, didn't sleep, and was still quite energized, quite high, really, really high, and hadn't slept very much. And obviously the lows, like staying in bed, not getting out, not going out of the room, not having contact with people outside of the room because of anxiety, and risk taking. There can be an element of risk taking as well, which obviously isn't good for the person, but there's something about that gets them maybe a light in some ways. Sometimes obviously the whole thing about addiction, could be an addiction to anything really. Sometimes what happens is, because we're a drug and alcohol free service here, when somebody comes, they may have been smoking weed or they may have been doing other drugs. Obviously they can't when they come here, but then the addiction switches. So what's common here might be gambling, online gambling. So if somebody has an addiction to something, whatever it is, it could be like we had one tenant here who was online, buying things online fairly constantly, because that made her feel good,
Yeah. Have you heard of internal family systems therapy?
I've heard of family systems therapy, but not internal family systems therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like IFS, it's very kind of much based around trauma, but it looks at you as having multiple parts. Yes. And just what you're saying there about the addictive, like I'm addicted to weed or gambling or sex or whatever, that part is going to find a way to feel better. So it'll go to whatever thing is available, like you've just said, so maybe it was drugs and now they can't do that. So they go on to online activities to get that same kind of release, which is super interesting when you kind of, you look at it as an overall systematic issue, not just like there's a specific problem with the specific behavior.
Yeah, the behavior is just a behavior. from our perspective, I suppose from my perspective, it's just a behavior. It's a coping mechanism. It has helped the person to cope up to now. They're here, they're around, they have survived. So it's a coping mechanism. So I think the bit that I would never do is shame somebody for developing an addiction, because it helped them to cope. So now we need new coping strategies. That's going to take a bit of time. And what's at the root of the addiction? That's the bit that probably interests me more. And I think it's more, I don't know, compassionate to the person, that actually, okay, yes, I have developed this, but actually, why? Why did you develop it? There was a reason. And the other thing we would do a lot of here is developing the compassionate internal working model. That we all have a really harsh, I certainly probably grew up with a bit of a harsh one, is I'm doing the best I can. That's the piece. I'm doing the best I can. Today, I'm not having a great day, but that's all right. I'm doing the best I can.
And that's such a, sorry, continue.
Yeah. And even with the people who work here, I'm the overall manager. I keep saying to them, look, we're all doing the best we can, and you're the one making the decision. Yeah, okay, we can go in and reflect and say, look, maybe I could have done something differently. We all could. But it's to be that I'm doing the best I can. That's enough.
Yeah. That's huge. And especially, I think with anything shame related, if you can kind of separate that out, and like an addiction, like you're saying, oh, I'm a terrible person, I can't stop myself from doing this thing, I'm awful, versus getting curious, like you're saying, where is this coming from? Why am I actually trying to pacify myself with this behavior? Do you have any maybe questions you could share with people that people listening could maybe utilize from developing more of that kind of self-compassion around stuff maybe that they are frustrated with themselves about?
I suppose the reason I brought that up actually is because I think the thing is, unless we start talking about stuff, saying it's okay, whatever I've done, and it's like, part of the thing here is we had training last year around addiction and mental health. And the idea behind that was, unless we start talking about it, people aren't going to talk about it. And then that just encapsulates the shame even more. I suppose, look, some bits I've used in the past would be, is it a fact or a thought? Is it a fact what I'm thinking in my head? Is this actually a fact, or is it just a thought? And is the thought actually helpful? Is this a helpful thought for me to have? And that's just kind of a CBT thing. It's probably not helpful. And then what I would say to the tenants here is, look, we are hardwired for negativity. All of us are, because it helped us to survive. So we have to work at being positive, and it's not that easy when you've had a lot of traumatic experiences, because that will hardwire you for negativity. So it's something that we have to work on. But again, I keep coming back to this whole piece of, look, I'm doing the best I can. It won't always work for me. But as time goes on, I suppose I heard a very good description one day from a guy. He was talking about emotions, and he was saying, okay, so you can have what are called negative emotions and positive emotions. And we can ride the bus to the negative emotions into a toxic dump, or you can get a taxi back the other way into the positive stuff. And I thought it was a really good way of just describing it, because even more recently here, I was talking to one of the tenants and I was saying, you have to keep, what are the positives that are happening for you right now? So the positives, even though he wasn't in a great place, is that he's come here, big step. The fact that he's getting up every morning, big step, which he wasn't when he was living at home. And the fact that he wants to do something different with his life, they're all positive things, because once we go into one negative thought, we go into a negative spiral, and that just brings us down. Now, none of this is easy. It's great for me saying it. Do you know what I mean? But it's a work in progress. And that whole thing, there is a thing called compassion therapy, developing that we are the best friend of ourselves. What would we say to our best friend? Oh, look, you're having a hard time. But what do we say to ourselves? And I suppose the other bit would be looking for care. So I was very interested in attachment theory. And I went to study with a woman called Dr. Una McCluskey in York, because I was kind of going, why can't I look after myself as well as I should be? Or why can't any of us? So that piece of self-care, it's not easy, actually. Self-care isn't, but I suppose it's understanding, look, I'm a carer. I was a carer at a very early age. And that's a pattern. what I'm not so great myself, even is looking after myself. So that's probably the same pattern that lots of the people who come here have as well.
In health care as a whole, I would say that's a pattern, right?
Right across the board. Social workers, nurses. I was watching a program, I don't know if you saw it last night, you probably didn't, it was on Channel 4, and it was about the nursing strike in England. And there were nurses this year who went on strike, and they were actually crying because they were on strike, and so upset because they'd never been on strike. And I was thinking that because that is with carers, we sometimes can care to the point where we burn ourselves out.
Yeah, very true. So that's the attachment. It's like anxious attachment, detached, secure,
avoidant.
Avoidant.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a quick kind of summary of those for people?
Well, I suppose again, it's down to like when somebody comes here where they're probably not going to be too securely attached. I'm not really expecting that. You know what I mean? What I'm expecting is that they'll probably be avoidant or they'll probably be anxious. The avoidant person is not going there in terms of attachment with anybody. And often that could be associated with trauma because of the disassociation piece as well. And the anxious person, then it's almost like they're so anxious they kind of constantly need us, that they maybe themselves haven't detached, fully. So the securely attached person, I haven't really met that many people securely attached.
Yeah.
I didn't work here.
And I'd love you to talk about it because I don't know a lot about it, but the kind of interesting part is like you can like an anxious attached style and a detached style can attract each other and trigger each other, right?
Yeah, and there can be a fit between the two of them. Seeing a thing one time, it was like a jigsaw. They actually fit together. It doesn't make the healthiest relationships, but they actually can fit together. Whereas I suppose, obviously, somebody, if they're avoidant and they meet somebody who's securely attached, that's going to be a difficult attachment for them to develop. So I haven't met too many people because of the world I've worked in as well, and probably because of my own family history. I haven't met too many. I remember telling a story. One person comes to mind, which is a girl I used to work with about 25 years ago, and she was an accountant. Sylvia, her name was Sylvia, and she always struck me because she always knew what she wanted. She always had standards for herself. I think she was always able to plan ahead. She wasn't as chaotic maybe as I was, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and I've changed careers about 4 times. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think she knew from a very early age what it is she wanted. She was very sure about herself. In terms of crisis, she was able to deal with crisis. She was able to see it as a crisis and then detach from it. That's making sense. I don't know if that's making any sense.
And is that like you would say she would have a secure attachment style?
I think she's probably, off the top of my head, probably the only person I can think of,
Yeah. Okay.
Because I've worked in social care a lot.
That's actually the next question I wanted to ask you. Like I remember I was working in Melbourne. I was working as a coach there for 4 years. And one of my clients, she was a counselor, a family counselor. So she was seeing just, every day, like really horrific stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember she said something to me. She was like, I need to keep reminding myself that my world is not the real world. This is like, 5%. It's not everyone, but I need to, I can start believing that this is just, whatever, rape, domestic abuse, all these things are just happening every day. So like, how do you kind of, understand the bigger picture that it's not always severe, psychiatric issues going on?
Well, it's like I suppose you, in some ways, this sounds awful, right? But when you hear stuff, you can't unhear it.
Yeah.
Right. So an example I'll give you of this is one time I was traveling from Galway to Limerick, and I won't say the name of the place, but there's a place on that route where I had worked with a woman who had been severely attacked and raped, right? 10 years before. And I was just driving.
What was the facility?
It was a forest.
Oh,
right?
okay. It was just the
just
area.
Passed this forest in a car with my husband, and my body just went like that. just at the name of the forest.
Mm.
And then I immediately started to remember what she'd said to me, you know. So I think there is a thing called vicarious trauma. So we as carers, whether we like it or we don't like it, we do suck it in. We do hear it. You can't unhear it. When I finished working in domestic violence, it was interesting. I'd be in the supermarket and I'd see a couple and they'd be going around the supermarket. And my first thought was, oh yeah, he's controlling everything that's going into the supermarket trolley.
Mm.
Now, so a bit like your, you know, the lady you worked with, obviously that's not the reality every day, but because you hear these things, you can't unhear them. Yeah, it's not possible. I don't think it's possible. I think you, as somebody who hears that stuff all of the time, of course, logically, you know that that's not the world at large, but also I have heard in the course 20 something years, some terrible things, and you can't unhear them because you've heard them. I do have supervision. I go to supervision once every 4 weeks, and I'm very lucky. I have 2 kids myself, and I have 3 stepchildren, and you know, so I have quite a good network of family and friends. But you can't unhear them; they do happen. And when you've heard a lot of them, it's in there, I'd say, somewhere.
Yeah, let's shift gears into, you know, I guess what I get so excited talking to what you guys are doing is like the potential impact if this places like yours start scaling around the country. Do you want to share, like, we can talk some differences in, you know, cost saving, like from a state cost saving standpoint, but just actual people improving as well, which I think is the most important thing.
So, I mean, I know, for example, that to keep somebody in the acute unit in Cork is 7,000 a week. That's 1 week, right? I haven't done the costing for here, but I know for sure it's not 7,000 a week, right? But I think for me, like I was at the Shine conference on Wednesday, and it's to hear people's experience. I think it's just, there has to be something else rather than psychiatric units and medication. No, you need them, you need the medication, but there has to be some supports for people when they leave hospital. And like every day, I'll be honest with you, Conor, like last week, every day I get a call from somebody here. There's nowhere for me to go. Is there anywhere else like this in the country? I had a call from a guy in Clonmel, for example, been in and out through the psychiatric unit for the last 10 years, also has no addiction. Where can I go? Is there anywhere like this? And I can't do anything for him. There is nowhere like this. Now Curious Farm is to open up in Kildare, and the guy John McKeown who's setting that up, his son committed suicide, and that was the impetus for him to set that up. But there has to be something else aside, you know, not leaving all that stuff aside, but with it. I think that's the bit I would like to see is, yes, you need your psychiatrist, yes, you need your medication, but you also need somewhere to recover from this, somewhere counselling, you know, somewhere that you can be supported for a while till you figure out what are you going to do next with your life. If you've been in a room for 7 years, you need something else. You know, you're not going to recover in that room, no matter how many tablets you have.
Yeah. I want to go, there's a few ways I want to go. I'll go I'll go here first, and then I want to ask if there's any like specific country models that are worth looking at that are doing it well. But like, I think the really important thing that you shared as well is like people will be in the regular model, they go in, they get like, they're in the high ops unit or whatever you want to call it, and then it's like, okay, you're okay now you go home. And then the rate of rehospitalization, I'm sure the numbers are astronomically high. Like, it's just people are going in and out, and there's no like people aren't, you know, it's not working clearly. It's but you guys, so it's 24 hours, and I like the way then it's like, okay, you've proven yourself. I'm guessing that's what happens. Now you're in the cottage. Now you've got more autonomy. Now you're actually in Charleville, for people listening. That's like just a local town nearby. And then there's another connection where you're getting support. You might be even going with them to the psychiatrist. So there's a real like kind of, I don't know if hand-holding is the right word, but like it's a reintegration into society, which is going to be way more powerful, right?
Exactly. So it's like somebody comes here, they're getting high support, then they go to the cottage, there's no staff in the cottage, but you're still on the grounds. Then you're assessed. It's kind of it's assessment isn't even a great word. It's like there's a conversation with the person. How are you doing? Are you managing your meds? How are you feeling? What do you need to do if you're not feeling well? And then there is the move to chair level. Some people make that move quicker than others. Then when you're in chair level, it's looking at, okay, you might go to the bakery a couple of days, but what else do you want to do? Do you want to join the gym? Do you need a hand to do that? Are you doing your own shopping? Then the next piece is maybe you want to move into rented accommodation, so we can support you to do that. Even when you leave us, then there'll be a period of time that we will do post-tenancy work with you. How's it going now you're back at home or you're back in Cork City? Is there anything we can do for you? Like we had a guy here last year, he went back home, he went back to college, didn't work out for him, which was fine. Now he's got a job, doing really well. He's into fitness, actually, as it turns out, as well. And he's got a part-time job. He's living at home. We'll be discharging him soon, really, because he doesn't need us anymore. But if he did,
fantastic.
This is the bit, though, Conor. If he did in 6 months' time or whatever, that something happened and he needed us, he could ring us. Because that sometimes happens is that if somebody leaves early or whatever, they might want to come back. Where I stand on this is the door is always open for them. They can always come back. They can always contact us. And I think that's really important, actually. Because
totally. Support.
it's very lonely. It's a very lonely place and a very isolated place for somebody who has a severe mental health issue. And their families. It's for the family as well. They may not know what to do, where to go, who to talk to. They may not understand the diagnosis. I spend a good bit of time here talking to the families actually as well, But I think for the person, it's a very lonely place. And also it's, the bit that I think people forget is grief, the grief and loss that somebody's going to experience because I have developed this. I had planned a life for myself. It could be any of us. And now I can't do what I had planned. And there is a grief in that. And there is, all the phases of grief you have to go through to come to acceptance that this is maybe where I'm at now. But I had planned this career. I had planned a life. Maybe I was going to have a partner and kids. And that doesn't seem so possible now.
Yeah, that's massive. It's, again, like you're approaching it like you're working with humans, not like it's some machine or animal or whatever.
Well, I suppose we're lucky here, Conor, in that I really think this is one of the lucky things that we get to work with somebody for 18 months and longer, and we get to really know them and live with them, and we get to really know them. I think for working in a mental health unit, like that must be so hard because they're dealing with so many people. Whereas we take up to 12 people here and we really get to know them and we really support them every aspect of their life, So we're looking at a social care model. So their education, their training, their family, their medication, their mental health, their physical health. Like I was saying to you, we've one of the staff members here who does Muay Thai or Muay Thai, I don't know, whatever it is, boxing. And he comes in, and that's his interest, happens to be his interest, but also happens to interest some of the lads here. So, he can do a bit of that with them. And we have a staff member who's into boxing, a young girl actually, and she comes in and that's her interest and she brings that in. And so even in the interests, that's really important, because you have two people meeting who have interests who are the same. It's not one person who has a mental health and one person is a worker. It's two people meeting who have the same interest.
Yeah, I love that. Is there any countries that you're like, okay, if Ireland could really move in this direction, like this is a really good role model for where to take things? Is there any country that you look at that is doing it really well?
When Joan started this, she went to Gould Farm in America. That's where she.
Can you repeat the place?
I think it's in Boston.
Okay, yeah, in Boston.
Where she went to, and I know there is one in the Netherlands as well, a bit like this similar model. But it's funny, strangely enough, Conor, we have two visits, one from the University of California, which is next week. We have 7 people coming from the University of California to see Sli Eile. And we were to have a visit from a woman called Liz Everett from Australia, because like that, they don't have anything like this in Australia, actually.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. I was surprised myself at that, but they're trying to get funding, but they don't have it. So to my knowledge, there is places like this in America and in the Netherlands, but not that many, not as many as you'd expect,
So there's no country that's kind of rolled this out in multiple kind of locations around the country?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Wow.
Not to
Yeah.
my
I think it would be, I doubt you have a big enough sample size, but it'd be super interesting to see the, rehospitalization numbers.
Yeah, that's my.
You know,
I was saying that to you, that I would like to do a study next year, is to try and look at somebody who comes here and to compare that with somebody who doesn't come here and what the outcomes might look like, you know.
yeah, I think that would be super interesting just to show like, well, whatever. I would say it's a crazy difference. But yeah, I
I
think that
would
would be a
think,
fantastic.
yeah, I would think it
Yeah.
would, but that would be
So
part.
yeah. Well, Jess, look, I'm so happy we connected. You're doing amazing work, and it was just so great. I'm sure we're going to have multiple podcast episodes because there's going to
Yeah,
be
well,
tons of
look,
stuff to talk about.
and I have to say, Connor, look, and I know everybody says it, but it isn't just me. Yeah, okay, I'm the
Mhm.
CEO's friend, but like, it's the team of people I have with me here and their commitment, and the heart. I keep coming back to this because I just think here there's a big heart for people. It's like as you said, it's meeting the person. It's a person. We're working with a person, and that's important.
Totally. Going to give you one last question to leave everyone with. If you could
Yeah.
put something on a billboard in somewhere like Times Square, what would you put in it and why?
I think I would put about something like mental health is everyone's business or can happen to anyone. And the why is because I would like to see the stigma of it reduced, because I think if you reduce the stigma and shame, people would talk about it a lot more, and maybe we could prevent it from becoming more serious for people. But I really believe, it's everybody has mental health, everybody suffers with mental health. So it's the stigma piece, I think that's what
Yeah,
I'd put.
100%. Where can people learn more about what you guys do?
So we have a website, which is www.schliele.ie. And we also have a Facebook page, which, does a lot about our market and what we're selling at the moment or what's going on at the moment. So you could see pictures of potatoes up there. You could see pictures of cows up there. You could see pictures of cars up there. So it's a very varied Facebook page. And the website is, as I say, that ongoing. We kind of throw up stuff that when we think about it, when I think about it, I think, oh God, I must throw up something into that. But yeah, that's where they would find us.
Great. I'll link all that in the show notes, and I'm also going to link a donation page as well, because I think a big part of what you guys are doing is it's going to be private donations is what's going to really get
Yeah, I
this
was saying
going.
that to you. So look, we're lucky to have gotten funding from the HSE, about 90%, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but actually we have 11 staff here, 24-hour care. We run a bakery and a farm and a farmer's market, and that's all about raising funds. Because I was saying to you, my big thing at the moment is we only have one worker at night here and at the weekends, and I want to have two. Because it's it's a lot for one person to carry. So
Definitely.
that's my fundraising for this year is two workers, one at night and one at the weekend, that we'd have an extra one. So
Yeah, and that's what we're going to work
yeah.
towards over the coming months. So yeah, I'll put the donation page, and then we'll kind of talk more about the donations on, I think, future episodes as well. Okay.
Yeah. Connor, listen, thanks for having me.
No problem. Great stuff.